Hi and welcome to the next installment of Circling the Dream. Today we're going to be talking to multi-award winning mixer and sound designer Ben Baird, who aside from being a lovely man and source of some of the best trivia you've ever heard in your life, is a wonderful film and TV mixer. He's been working in the UK and Europe for over 30 years, and what I love most about this interview is how Ben's love of the art just doesn't seem to have diminished over the years. In fact, I'd say quite the opposite. Anyway, let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this one. Among other things, we'll be finding out how he prepared for this interview.
Drank 6 pints of Guinness.
His adventures in the world of rock and roll.
The headphone feed was so loud you could hear it through the soundproof doors out into the mews and out in the street.
All about his wildest dreams.
I would love to look like David Niven.
And how many times a day he checks the mirror to see if he's actually starting to look like David Niven.
650 times.
We talk about audio a lot and discover the sound that stimulates Ben more than any other.
Leonard Rossiter's Russian accent.
And of course he'll be peppering our chat with the trivia he's so well known for. The stuff that he picked up from his mate down the pub.
Croydon's McDonald's has the world record at the time, the world record for the largest number of hamburgers eaten in a single hour in the world.
What an amazing fact. So without any more ado, let's crack on and have a chat with Ben. If you enjoy this, please check out the other interviews on the channel, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button and the notification button, and you'll be informed automatically of new stuff as it comes along. Also, if you have anyone that you'd like me to interview in particular, I'm always happy to reach out, so just get in touch. This is a really great one. I hope you enjoy it. Here is Ben. So look, thank you very much for doing this.
No, you're very welcome.
You to give your time. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how long you've been working in the sound industry?
Yeah, my name's Ben Baird, and I would say that there's three ways of looking at how long I've been working in the industry. The official one would be 35 years, but it's possible that I started in 1975 when I started making my brother appear in the radio plays that I was forcing him to be the main character because my dad got a cassette recorder that had a record button on it. Then, of course, in the middle of the 80s, I was in a band and I recorded the band and I got quite into the recording stuff, wrote to every recording studio in London, and one got back to me. And actually what they did was documentaries and slideshows and stuff like that. And there's sound developments up in Primrose Hill. And that was in 1989. So I think that's probably the official time that my start in the industry was. And I was there as the music librarian, which was an absolutely fantastic job in those days because you're looking after all the production music library. And because they did slideshows, there was a very strong connection between this studio and the production music libraries. So entertainingly, on day 2 of the job there, I'd had my 21st birthday party that a fight had broken out in, and I got a call from the police on my second day saying, why haven't I appeared in court for this fight? And I didn't know. So I had to tell to my boss on day 2 that I need the rest of the day off to go to appear in court for a fight that broke out in the party. And then day 3, the Music House Music Library are taking me out to introduce me to all the Music House people. And we came into Soho and went to the White Horse and drank 6 pints of Guinness. And it was a real challenge. Anyway, I came back and I sat in my office and I started librarying the tapes, with typing the computer. And then I was woken up about an hour later by my boss because apparently I brought all their network down because my head had landed on the letter L and it had pressed more L's than the system could handle. So that's on day 3, things are not looking too rosy. But actually, it was a great place because there were 3 engineers, Sean O'Shea, who I'm still working with, and there's Pete Brown and a bloke called Paul Hamilton. Paul Hamilton kind of took me under his wing and showed me a lot of stuff. And then there was the first recession of the 90s, and half of them left. And so my boss said, I think I just walked into the studio and says, let me have a go. and it seemed to sort of work out. And
You were cutting on tape, or was this on?
yeah, all on tape. Yeah, and
I
then
remember
shortly
that. Yeah.
the DAR sound station arrived.
Yeah.
And also the first Pro Tools. And I think what was quite interesting is that obviously because they, it was a professional organisation. I mean, the studios were really nice studios. And I mean, the thing that excited me once is that they did do one music session before I arrived, which was an overdub for one of the Motorhead albums.
Oh,
And
wow.
the headphone feed was so loud you could hear it through the soundproof doors out into the mews and out in the street.
What was your first experience with digital audio workstation then?
Well, the DAR.
Yeah.
The DAR sound station, which was, and I think still to this day, the ergonomics, is that the right? The user interface is absolutely divine. And I kind of want to invent a Pro Tools controller that has its jog and shuttle wheels. I mean, editing right, absolute to precisely, the weighting was perfect. It was like the difference between playing on a Clavinova and a Steinway, I think. Sort of like, it was really, Pro Tools, the second iteration, I think, of Pro Tools was out. And because we were doing interested in the computer games at this point, because I'd written this document about WAV files and all the rest of it, I took it to my boss. And so he gave me a small promotion and said, right, you can go and start working on the computer games stuff and see what we can get. So shortly afterwards, we ended up recording the Oxford English Dictionary. That's a tough gig, I'm going to be honest with you. Because actually, I've sat there and listened to every single word in the Oxford Dictionary. And but it actually allowed the whole file-based thing, and also was talking to DigiDesign in the early days about how things were going to go. And it was a very interesting, open relationship. And in fact, it got to the point that we had a whole sort of special version of Pro Tools that you would work on a laptop without, this is probably about 96, that would not require any hardware, because we were doing the FIFA football game at this point, and so that they were quite interested in how... And we were recording commentators in their homes already around, the world, so that they sort of said, well, actually, this version of Pro Tools, will make a beta version of it, and you can try it out, and it doesn't have any requirement of any hardware. It goes just straight in.
Just using the Mac sound card then.
Yeah, and this is like 90. That's probably about 96, to be honest, 97. So it's a little bit later at this point. But was quite interesting how the relationship was. And, and actually with being sort of in between Electronic Arts and Pro Tools and stuff like that was quite an interesting place to be. And it all came from this absolutely fabulous bloke, Chris Taylor, who, from Canada, who phoned one evening at midnight. And this is probably 95, and said, do you do sound for computer games? And I said, yes. And this is what I've been working on. And at last, it was not going to be dictionaries. It's going to be a proper computer game. And he says, we're over day after tomorrow. We're looking for a studio. And I said, that's fine. And he said, is there something wrong in London? Because I've phoned every studio in London and there's been no answer. You're the first to answer. And obviously Sound Development's that's quite a few studios.
Yeah, it is.
I said, well, you do know it's midnight. He said, oh, I've got the time zone the wrong way round. And I was thinking, well, from my point of view, it's turned out to be the luckiest mistake. And he was a great bloke. And actually,
You're still doing that gig, aren't you?
No, we actually stopped doing it last year. I think that it was harder to be as attentive. They were being really loyal to us. We were being really loyal to them. But I think the truth is that they needed probably fresh blood on it all by now. 26 years is a long time. When I think back to some of the things we were working on in the early days and the most amazing things with these people who are also finding their feet, whereas now Electronic Arts are the experts on this. Yeah, so it's sort of, they're teaching us. We've got no more really to give. So it sort of turned out okay.
A lot of what I was trying to kind of achieve with these podcasts was just an examination of how successful people have got to places within the industry that kids will want to get to. And most of them now, I would say, are looking to do a course of some sort.
Yes.
Did you do that or not?
I went to look at the Tonmeister course at Surrey University. And so I had to then go back and take another A-level to go and do that. And my dad, who's a music teacher, said he'd teach me. He said his experience of going back after you've left school to do another A level is very rarely do you do very well in it because you're tasting life. So I was enjoying life. So yeah, I didn't get the A that was required to go and do the Tonmeister course, but they did offer me a place on a mature student course if I came back when I was 24. And so I said, I'll keep that, but then I wrote to every studio in London and one gave me the job. And so I then didn't take that place. I think we've probably 5 or 6 of the people we've employed have been Tonmeisters. And I think the thing is that the listening bit is what they teach. So these kids come out and actually listening is not just a hearing thing. It's actually I can focus on this element. And Jack, who's currently who's our sort of head of audio, head of dialogue primarily, you can see he knows what's important to listen to, and because it's a musician, what a musician's skill and a sound, it's like dubbing skill. They still require music. They still require that sort of understanding of tone and.
So many of us came from music.
Yes, no, exactly, and I think that's important to I have music teachers for parents, and I was forced at the age of 7 to start learning the cello, and I became quite a good cellist. Tried professional cello playing, and I got quite a few entertaining gigs, but very, very stressful and not great money. So it wasn't going to. The stress was too much. Yeah, no, exactly.
So you never found yourself at a disadvantage against people who had a formal education in sound?
I think that if I was coming out now, the answer to that question was yes, a massive disadvantage. But I think I came at the time when it's like the apprenticeship model was equally valid. And by the end of it, I was, by the end of that year and a half, I was reasonably competent engineer on tape-based stuff. And I think, again, the learning of how to edit and, the first test he gave me was to record someone nicely counting to 10 and then edit it so it goes backwards. And you realise, right, part of this is not only being able to make the cut in the right place, but being organised enough to make sure you don't lose that bit of tape that's number 7. And all of those kind of things, and so I think that then it worked well. But then that was the things that they had people like me around to learn because they could afford it. Then I mean, it's interesting that the rates that studio charged are about not far different from the rates that we charge now, and that was 89.
Yeah.
But they could afford to have a couple of apprentices about, and there are quite a few courses. I mean, there's probably some dreadful ones, but there's some good courses about that.
Yeah.
As I say, the Tonmeister definitely, the teaching to listen, I think is an important part and of sort of the tools. I think we get obsessed by. It's very easy to become obsessed by the tools. The tools are designed to help me. Like if I'm sitting in front of a new, a thing that I'm not used to working, it's not fighting me. It's designed to help me. So I've just got to let it help me. And let it do what it does, and we'll together get through this, and not actually be obsessed with the fact I've got to know every single shortcut and every single bit and piece of it. Because when I find I need a shortcut, a quick reference on the internet, my goodness, says, oh yeah, you press this key 13 times and then hold your nose, it will do that in one go. Brilliant.
I mean, ultimately, the tools should become invisible. They should just be not.
And I think that's what the Tonmeister education does. Is it teaches you what your ears, your brain and your ears and your imagination. I mean, as we again know, your imagination is half the job. You sort of sit there and think of what it is you want to hear. Right, what do I need to do to make what I've got in my head come out of those loudspeakers? I mean, that's the thing. I've got 3 children who are clocking up more debt than they've already overtaken me.
Yeah.
So I do understand the idea that the apprentice. I mean, it'd be great if we went back in time and said, yeah, great. Halo has 10 apprenticeship places, and Warner Brothers has 10 apprenticeship places. Of which the intent is to have, in 3 years' time, you'll be working in this place. But the industry's just changed too far away from that. I mean, that's the snag. The idea of training someone into your, into the way that you do things, so that they, they build up and a house style. That's the word.
It's so
And
important.
that would be the dream. And you realise that are we creating a vacuum for the future for not having done that? It's very difficult to know. But anyway, to answer your question, the formal education I think is important now, whereas I'm not sure that it always has been. But certainly for now, I think it's a wise thing to do. I think but you also have it's because there's a lot of bogus courses out there as well, I'm sure. So it's really is finding that thing. I remember going to Kingston University and looking at their facilities and the things that they'd set up and the efforts that they were making and stuff. I thought, this is amazing. You know, it's really, I don't know whether it's still like that. I mean, we're going back 15 years. But they've got the right idea because they're teaching people to, you know, the important aspects, which is the listening. Here, you know, here's a pair of loudspeakers. They will play the thing that you play through it. Don't worry about that. It's what you bring to that party.
What is the most important quality that you look for or you think a sound professional should have?
Okay, I was thinking about this, and with a lot of my answers, when you ask for one thing, I'm going to give you two. I can't think of bringing it down, because we're also a service industry, and ultimately, I think again, this is one of the things that Paul Hamilton back in the early days, and actually Sean is brilliant at it, would sit there and say, the client's right. You have to give them what they want. That's the first thing. You're also sitting in the room for them for 8 to 10 hours a day. So try not to be too boring, and reasonable personal skills. I mean, one of the tricky things is, and I think that, again, this is another generational thing that we're seeing, is that quite a lot of my clients are more or less friends I go out and drink with. In fact, so like the electronic arts people came over last week. We lost the gig over a year ago and we still went out and got slammed in a couple of bars for the night. So I think you have to somehow, with some people, you have to let them in a bit, because it's that person skills, it's the communication, the understanding of the equipment is not the thing. It's not the thing. That's just a tool. It's the imagination to say, when someone says, "Well, I want this to feel tense," right? That's all they're going to give you. And your imagination has to turn the word tense into a series of sounds at certain levels that come out feeling tense. So that is often quickly. Well, I think it's, again, what's been lovely working in the independent British film world is that actually there is more time for that kind of thing. And when you're working on TV drama, quickly, we wanted it yesterday. Now, again, some of the stuff we're doing now, because of the VFX lag, you actually end up with quite a few more weeks on something because they're just never going to get that plane to crash into the ground in an afternoon. That's several weeks' work. So we can work on that as well for several weeks. So, I think that's the important thing. Personal skills, learn to listen. Those are the two most important things. The technology is sort of kind of secondary to that. And the other half of people who have come through our door to work for us have been people who've walked through the door and had the courage to sit there and says, whether, they present themselves nice and says, "Hi, I'm John," or "I'm Simon, here's my CV, if you've got anything going." And this person's doing the rounds, and they've walked in just for them, the lucky moment that we're sitting there saying, "I think we need to get someone else." And in he walks and he's, he shakes your hand, he's got confidence, but not too much confidence, and think, "Right, I'll give you a go. You can start next Monday." And so there've been quite a few people that has happened as well. And I think the problem with the music industry is that you can sit in a bedroom and produce music tracks and never meet anyone, and make money and make a living from that. But that does not work in the post-production industry, because you always will meet your director and your producers and the supervisors, and you have to get on with dialogue editors and sound effects editors and all of those things. You have to interact with those people, and especially now, you have to be considered to be nice when you're interacting with them as well.
What's the best bit of advice anyone ever gave you?
That the making or doing of something is only half the job. The other half of the job is making sure the world knows that you've done it, and will they buy it from you, please? Like my parents both, my mum wrote and my dad was a composer, but they were also teachers. And you sort of think, right, the hope was that you write something, then the world discovers it and says, we've discovered you, Ben. And you realise that no one's going around looking for anything that you've done. So, and I think obviously this was coming back from when I wanted to make, my own band, making my own music. And you realise that the making of the songs is only half of it. Getting the song out there is the other half. I think that is an important lesson to learn. The world is not really looking for you. So when you're doing something creative, part of you in your mind, you have to be, and again, this is the people skill, but part in your mind, you really have to be prepared to tell the world that this is what you've done, and come and buy into this over here. It's over here. They're not going to find it just like that.
Do you try every new bit of kit that comes along?
I try lots of it. Yeah. I try lots of things.
Really?
Yeah, I know, it's amazing. It's only about the last 5 years I've thought, damn it, I'm just going to try it. For example, I had in my mind. For example, we're doing this film, Pincushion. There's this bit where this girl's being bullied. And I actually thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could get the bully's voice in the middle of bullying to turn into a dog bark? And I remember thinking, there must be, this is like the 21st century, there must be something that will help me do this. And I found this little plug-in for like £70 called Morph SC. And it sort of kind of transforms, morph sounds from one to the other. And anyway, with about 2 days of final of editing, because it wasn't just as simple as doing this morphing thing, but with it, that this girl starts shouting and it turns into perfectly lip-synced dog barking. It's a 3-second shot or 4-second shot. And I was thinking, yeah, right, okay, I've got to make sure that I keep my mind open, because that never would have happened unless I put the strain. It wasn't that it cross-faded, it transformed. I think it's quite, it's quite a good little moment. And so, yeah, I constantly look, Sound Particles came out with a new panner in 9.1.6, so I got that. It's not quite the thing that I wanted, but it obviously got Spanner to get their act together. So now you can do 9.1.6 rotations. And it's also quite interesting, again, with the Atmos thing. And I think there's those left, right, wide speakers that suddenly you can get the sense that your room, as the camera's doing, especially flying camera shots, you can rotate the room. And obviously I look at lots of reverbs, in cinematic rooms and stuff like that. So when they come out, I have a look at them. So yes, I used not to, but I think the last 5 years I've thought, actually I should. Obviously I have go-to things like we all do. Unfortunately, my most go-to thing is the channel strip. That's got most of the things. Well, the little balls are perfectly placed to just do what they wanted to do. I know that I've got, it's like there's the Q3, if I want to go deeper. But obviously I use for my EQ matching, I'm still finding the RX EQ match is what I like at the moment for ADR matching. I think it takes a little bit of a while what you actually got to make it match to. But now I think I've sort of quite well sorted out. I have a problem with lots and lots of the reverb ambient matches. So I'm still working on what my favourite thing on that kind of thing is. And I look at, so that I came across, it's been probably there for years, but the Sound Shifter Audio Suite plugin that Waves does allows you to draw a little graph of how your pitch shifting and time bending goes. And you can do the most amazing little things. And, you think, right, that's been in my, Audio Suite list. It doesn't, because the problem with the timeline on Pro Tools is it moves at the same speed. But the Audio Suite, you can then you can make up your own speed. So I've been using that for quite a lot for making an engine sound going up and down and things like that. So yeah, I do. I went through an experience of a film about 4 or 5 years ago where the director did not want to do any ADR at all. And there was a scene where it was a very noisy location. And I said, I really, really think this would work nicely if we can get it so you've got all this, wind and stuff going on in the background, but we don't have to hear it. And this conversation is going on in this tempest of the things going on, but the conversation is extremely personal. And so eventually he let me do the ADR of this one scene. And there's three good actors in it. And we went round and round and round because he was absolutely did not want the performance changed, just was going to allow it to happen. And, sort of having to get this performance identical. We went, some sentences had 100 takes. But it was interesting because he was teaching me, as it turns out, how to listen to the emotion in the voice rather than everything else, and that was the thing that counted. And at the end of it all, we sort of got it cut together, and it took. I mean, the editing of this one. I mean, the scene's like a minute and a half. It's not even a big scene. It took about 2 days to edit together with all the takes and everything together. And then we played it to him, and he said, I love it. In fact, you've made some interesting choices. And I felt it was identical. And he says, you made some interesting choices, and I like the way this has changed here. And he'd sit there and think, oh, yeah, I have changed that so slightly, but actually makes them a tiny bit softer. Interesting. Anyway, now then, of course, he now phones up and comes to the next film and says, and after that, I love this ADR. We're going to ADR all of it. And I was thinking, oh, no. There was, having been still, 31 years in the industry, and was being taught how to listen to something at a new level. And I found that fascinating.
What are you going to recommend as 3 plugins that people should go out and have a play with?
I mean, I love what Cinematic Rooms is doing on the reverb front. I found that in many films, when you've got the dialogue cleaned up, the Acon dialogue cleaner up for me is the one I slightly prefer as my general go-to starting off point at the moment. It seems to be, in its gentle setting, it seems to be gentle. And obviously DX Revive is good, and Clarity is good if you've got a really odd scenario. But the Acon one, for me, is where I go to on my dialogue cleaning up. But yeah, Cinematic Rooms, I found with a nicely presented, performed bit of dialogue and Foley all going into Cinematic Rooms in a room that you've spent some time setting up. There's no need for anything else. You find yourself, I'll just get rid of those atmoses. I don't need any room tone. I don't need anything of that. That is everything. And actually, I think that as we're going on with, obviously we can go too far on the cleaning up for sure. But with the right place, you can actually now create these awkward silences in cinema and on television that are just the resonance of a room dying away, leaving where you as the audience exposed as watch what's going on without that background hiss that you used to have to put in to cover all the technical problems. It's quite interesting. I mean, when we went to a screening of Lady Macbeth, which has really got some really quiet scenes, it's super quiet in many places. And sitting there, I watched people stop eating popcorn because they were exposed. I was thinking, that's an interesting thing, that psychologically, they're not consciously doing it. They've stopped eating the popcorn because the film's not giving them anywhere to escape to. Yeah. And so I thought, right, I'm going to bear that in mind because that's a feeling. And again, it's all of these things. It's about feeling. Sort of an awkwardness is a good feeling for certain films, not for every film. You don't want that in Pitch Perfect. Oh no, maybe you do actually. So it is. Yes, so it's intriguing. So I find that Cinematic Rooms helps in that. Though I can't get away. Revibe, it's an old one, but I still like it. It's got some great rooms, and the sort of outside courtyard's very. I often have that going on, and I think what it does is if you put your ambience saturated into revibe, then suddenly, that actually is what my grandparents' room did actually sound like, that when the stuff's outside going in there, and it blends the dry and the wet in a very natural way. I find Altiverb has a little bit of separation. It's great for, sort of when you want a very specific sort of sound, but actually is a sort of place where the atmosphere sits. It doesn't sort of tell the same thing as I find that Revive and Cinematic Rooms do. There's a sort of reality to it. Some people will sit there and say the sign of a good soundtrack is that no one notices it. And I think actually phooey to that. I think if someone comes out and says, bloody hell, that sound was unbelievable, that's actually what I'm actually looking for.
Anyway, you've got 2 plugins left.
Pitch and Time. I think I have to do a pitch. And Pitch and Time I'm always using. And but I do enjoy the Wave sound shifter because it has you can draw a little graph. But I suppose the things, if I've got to take three, RX again has got so many things in it. It's very difficult. But I think Pitch and Time, Cinematic Rooms, and then for a bit of fun, I would say the Morph SC and see what you can play with it. The one that morphs sounds. It's called Morph SC, I think, or Morph 2. Morph 2. Because they morph one into the. Yeah, I mean it's really hard to make work. It's quite simple, the controls, but to get you're sitting there and you have to line up the sounds of what you want to do between the two. So in fact you're doing quite a lot of the work, but then it starts working, and then you get this blend of it morphing rather than crossfading, so it transforms, and then it started at the age of 9 with Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I think the thing that absolutely made my hair stand on the back of my neck is when at the end they're talking to the spaceships and the orchestra and the spaceships become the same voice, and you realise, oh my God, this thing that's been outside, guiding me along is actually the voice of the spaceships. And the way, it's 3 saxophones, I think, that play the first notes on the spaceships. And I thought, that still brings, even now, thinking about it, I don't know what it is. And then when you go, and then after that, watching for a few dollars more with a little pocket watch. And then you're like, and then Morricone's score takes it over from the pocket watch being really in there. And suddenly that's really messing with my head, because that's in the film and this is out of the film, and they've brought them together. How many times do you reckon Steven Spielberg made John Williams write the little da-da-da-da-da before he got it right?
I have no idea.
650 times. Obviously, I think it started off as a far more complicated piece. And it was sort of like, can we have a little bit less, a little bit less? I mean, I'd love to hear whether that's true. I mean, music's a very big part of the whole thing. John Williams' music, as I grew up with, Star Wars and then Indiana Jones and all of those things, and Superman. I mean, I think those Superman films are very much underestimated. And, all that stuff as a kid, I was 9, 10, 11, this is all happening. And then, of course, Alien comes out. And, it's like when I'm about 14, we watch a sneaky copy. And that's absolutely unbelievable. From the sound here as well obviously the conversation. I mean, what's quite interesting about the conversation is that it seems to be that someone said, right, that bit where you've got disembodied sound that's not directly connected with what you see, we've done that, so let's not ever do that again. Because I don't really know many films that have taken what was definitely a technique and a style and really utilised it to the same degree. Yet the crossfade and all these other, sort of sound tricks are used all the time. But that one was sort of left there because actually once you get into the fact that this voice is talking to you from another place, not what you're looking at necessarily, then it actually frees your mind to having so like there's a second image in the film at any one time. So I'm quite keen to sort of letting one director let me have a crack at really sort of trying to sort of not progress it, because it's hard to progress things, but to try something similar. I mean, I do remember having a brief discussion with Walter Murch on a documentary, and we actually had a disagreement about this documentary on CERN, which is I'm very interested in CERN and that whole European science project. Like, for example, do you know that they only run for half the year? Because during winter, they can't afford the electricity at the France heating winter rate. So they get it cheap from France during the summer only. And you think, this is actually discovering the future of science as we know it. But unfortunately, we can't have the electricity running all the time. 2001, which I saw the sort of the cleaned up version in the IMAX a couple of years ago, and is as amazing photographically and visually as today as it was then. And they have silence, absolute silence in a shot, and that has always been something that's stunned me as well. There's the music. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is one of my favourite films because it turned me onto film at the age of 9. And Matter of Life and Death, for example, is a film that sticks out as one of my favourites. Because I would love to look like David Niven. I mean, he's so beautiful in that film. And but also, it's like with the acting and the imagination, the use of colour, and also again, there's this moment of absolute silence, and it's extremely effective when the world freezes and suddenly you got these moments where there's nothing. And you think that is such a bold thing to do, and
I agree. I love silence.
yeah, so I'm a big fan of those sort of things. I mean, obviously, recently, like with everything, you're not going to get just 3 out of me, I'm afraid. Lion, for example, I think the first half of Lion is one of the most memorable things that I've watched in recent times. But then this year comes along, and between Zone of Interest and All of Us Strangers, both of those films, I reckon that I'll be revisiting them regularly, and we'll certainly be talking about them still in 10 years' time.
Both mixed in a very good studio, I've heard.
Well, are they both haloed? The Zone of Interest is the script and the work as a gift to the sound team.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, I've read the stories about all the efforts that they went to, but I think actually that it's the not playing all of those efforts as any kind of starring role, but this subtle background that just gently burrows at your brain, but not sitting there glamorizing or, it's like an all glorious Dolby Atmos. It's over the wall and it's played over the wall, and I think that it was a gift well executed. I mean, I'd be very proud to have done that, but probably would have done an absolutely terrible job of it. But it was, I thought, but I think it's also the detail and the story and all the rest of it. And I mean, the time that we're in now, I mean, I'm in no position to really comment on that, but it feels, like it couldn't have come out at a more relevant time, though obviously it is also consequently divisive. But yeah, and then All of Us Strangers, I didn't know anything about it. And of course, because I've relatively recently lost both my parents, and so there's parts of it that I felt talked to me who missed my parents. Then latterly I find out more about the film, and I think, well, I'm going to take my interpretation because it kind of fits anyway and it's not far off. And I thought, well, that's a skill to have it, that you can build your own film in what's going on. In both of those films, there's not a beat wrong from any person.
No, I agree.
And I think that's what makes them memorable. And I think when you go back to, I mean, Matter of Life and Death, there's, every part is really, I mean, it's of its time, but every part is perfect in many, many ways. I think 2001, with the possible exception of Leonard Rossiter's Russian accent, again, everything is amazing.
What piece of your own work are you most proud of?
Because it's someone else's film, and I think probably about 2015, that sort of mentally realised that this is someone else's project that I'm helping on, and in fact, it's the best thing to do is to help them in their project rather than try and take ownership of a thing about that project and the rest of it. So things slightly transformed, and so that in fact, if I get something that a director says, yeah, that's why I want it, then great, that's the job done. There have been a couple of films in the last few years where what the directors wanted isn't what I felt should be what's there, but that's what they want, and I'm happy to do that. I mean, particularly there's the film Disobedience that I loved. Very subtle, and the idea was to create a cocoon around North London for this sort of the sound, is for Hendon, is it? Yeah, and it is this actual cocoon, claustrophobic cocoon with nothing actually going on, and then they leave to go into the centre of London, and it becomes a lively place. So I very much was proud of the way that sort of worked, and the Wonder. I mean, Lady Macbeth. I'm very proud of that, and the level. No, I mean, there's all of the level. I mean, just this film, the Limbo, which we went round really twice. There was a sort of like, okay, Ben, you do what you want to do. And then when I presented what I wanted to do, it was like, yeah, that's kind of in the right sort of place, but, And then we sort of like went round it again. And then I looked at the end and realised, A, that's collaboration, and B, he was right. And actually the purest view that I'd taken, which was pure only to my own imagination, it was improved. But actually, because then we worked together, and I turned off that bit, which is it's my soundtrack, I'm going to do it in my way. It's very interesting sort of, I think it came by this documentary about cognitive dissonance, and they realised that actually you can be wrong and it's okay to be wrong. Yeah. And in fact, it allows you then to be bolder. And we've just done Conclave, which I'm very proud of that soundtrack, which will be out in the end of the year. And again, just like trying to build everything from the previous, so everyone gets the next thing from the previous exploration and learning. So I mean, Starvacre, which is the one where I was made to stand up in BFI. I mean, it was quite nerve-wracking because it's a very sort of bold, sort of dissonant soundtrack. But actually, when someone asks a question about how did you do that, and then I sit there and say, well, actually, as it turns out, I discovered is a 416 and the aperture of a flute are exactly the same. So I've got this microphone and popped it on there to get the turbulence of a pipe. We play wind down it. Of course, the microphone's stuck in there. Well, it's not stuck in there now, but it's stuck in there for about 4 months then after that. And so when someone asks those questions, so it's very difficult to sit there. I mean, Merlin, I remember sort of sitting there, we did the first episode of Merlin, and I watched it with my kids and realised that we'd done all these artistic things and all the rest of it. And they're sitting there at the prime, perfect Merlin age, like 9 and 7, and they were making so much noise. I realised, right, going to remix this, dialogue up front, the sword clashes up front, the music when it needs to be is up front, when it doesn't need to be, it's back, and we don't need to worry about crowd and all of those things because they're going to be doing all the talking. And that was again and constantly think, that really stands out. And then consequently the fights with the BBC when R128 came out, but Strictly Come Dancing was not R128, and sitting there getting a dispensation for an extra 3 dB for Merlin and Atlantis. And I was proud of that battle.
What advice would you give to a young person who's looking to get into post then?
As a sound post, I would say that if it's a young person who's still got their A-levels ahead of you, have a look at the Tonmeister course at Surrey University. I think it's a good place to start looking, but it is, it's a high expectation. I think so, like it's 2 A's and a B and all the rest of it. But I also think that, if you're reasonably nice, well-presented, and I don't mean well-presented in the sort of traditional Thai sense, I think it's sort of just whether, you're happy and don't make people scared when you walk into a room, then, sort of trying to just trying to walk into doors. And I think what I've learned is, on average, about 2 or 3 months after you think that you're probably going to give up because it's not working is when the break sort of seems to happen. Yeah. And it's the people, and I think that's part of the filtering out process, is there's probably a year of terribleness, and it's when you sit there and say, okay, I'm going to do something else. And it's then shortly after that often it happens. But I wrote to every single recording studio in London. It was about 200 letters, and I've only got one reply. And but I got one reply, and without that, that reply, it would be I wouldn't be doing this now. And it's about like everything in life. Is if you, I know that this sounds like like the 7 things to do to be rich and famous, isn't? But if you're open to adapting what your expectations are at the drop of a hat, then you stand a good chance of walking in and saying, is there a job going? And saying, well, no, but actually, if you want to do this down here, that might be interesting. This is not the same thing, but it gets you a foot in the door. And once you're inside, your foot's inside, you then get the inside view. But it's just usually, I reckon, it's a couple of months beyond what you really want to do. Yeah.
So it's tenacity, really, isn't it?
It is. Well, I mean, at the end of it all, you're sitting in a room with, a world famous person or a Hollywood star at the end of the day, and you've got to be able to have your position in that. If you're not the sort of person that can talk to, I don't know, Woody Harrelson or whatever, and say, what we're really trying to do is this, and him then to say, what are you telling me to do, and and not being able to deal with stuff like that, you need to discover that early on, because that's the stuff that happens when you've been around for 30 odd years, that suddenly, oh, right, all that training has come to the point that I'm now dealing with a difficult situation, or not difficult, that's the wrong word, or a challenging situation where there's there's art being created here, and everyone's trying to get into place.
A horror session.
Yes. We used to do this show when I was at the other play at Sound Developments, called Free for All, which was sort of like a magazine show on Channel 4, and it would go out, I think, at 6 o'clock on Tuesdays. So Monday night, the edit would come over, and you'd have to conform it. And so I would often be the engineer at night doing this conform, and then I had a voiceover recording session the next morning, having worked all night. And it was just before Christmas. And I remember sitting in the studio, and we were recording something in German for an interactive DVD, a CD-ROM of some sort. And I remember thinking, oh, I've got this terrible headache. And just carried on recording quite okay. And no one else seemed to have any issues. And so gave them the tape, and it went off to Germany to be programmed and encoded. And I remember coming into the studio after Christmas and turning on the studio lights, and there was this ringing sound in the studio. And I was thinking, that seems awfully familiar. I thought that was the headache. And then I went over, and just above the microphone was the light bulb that was in a state of almost going. So I flicked it, and it went out. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, this could be quite serious. I don't know. Anyway, nothing happened until the next day, when the letters started arriving. What is, like, and all these sort of, this engineer's terrible, should be checked out. And, my boss, he was absolutely brilliant at standing behind you. I mean, he was cross with me, but he stood behind me and all the rest of it, and said, I wasn't in danger. But yeah, I mean, and I listened to the recordings thinking, that's up all night. I'm going to not do that again, I think, because he's like 24 hours, you actually talk yourself into this hugely ringing noise as being some headache.
What's your favourite cake?
I'm classic. It has to be chocolate. I would like to be more imaginative and say that, a banana fritter split cream cardamom cake is my favourite. But I have to say that it's chocolate, especially with a nice chocolate butter icing in the middle and icing on the top.
Okay, well, next time I see you, we'll have some chocolate cake.
Chocolate cake and yes, that'd be nice.
That sounds lovely. I'll give you a shout when I'm back in London.
Okay.
Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate that.
No, you're welcome.
So that was Ben. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please check out some of his work, especially Lady Macbeth. Outstanding film, outstanding sound work. I think you'll really enjoy it. The next interview in this season is Joe Jackson. Joe is a freelance sound editor who's working in film. This interview was recorded a little while ago, actually just after COVID, or maybe before COVID, I can't remember, I've lost track. I think it's really relevant to anyone who is at the beginning of their career or looking to change to being freelance or moving from TV into films and such like. There's a lot of good stuff in there. This was recorded at a time that Joe was setting out on a movie about a spy with 3 numbers in his name. I don't think I've given too much away there. Anyway, check it out. It's a really good one. If there's anyone else that you want me to interview, just get in touch. I'm really not shy. I'm quite happy to reach out and speak to whoever. And if there's any questions that you want me to ask in particular, again, send them along. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll shut up and let you get on with your day. Until the next time, bye-bye.